Right. Good morning, everyone. We're just going to give it another minute or so for people to join us, and then we'll get started. All right. Looks like we still have a few people joining us, but why don't we get started? Because we have a lot to cover today. And thanks everyone for joining us. Before I jump in, I'm going to turn it over to Erica Perez, who's going to walk through how to access the Spanish translation services today.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, everyone. This is Erica Perez. I will be interpreting from English to Spanish. And oh yeah, it's already on. The interpretation is already on. Little globe is the bottom. Click there and choose English in case someone will be speaking Spanish. And I will say this in Spanish now. Buenos días, mi nombre es Erica Pérez y vamos a estar teniendo este webinario en inglés y en español. Yo voy a estar interpretando del inglés al español. Si está utilizando su computador, en la parte de abajo hay un globito. Haga clic ahí y escoja español. Si está usando su celular, hay 3 puntos. En la parte de abajo derecho, presione ahí y luego va a aparecer en una lista, entre ellas interpretación de idiomas, luego inglés-español, escoja español y finalizado. Gracias. Just a quick reminder to please be mindful of your pace when you will be presented. Thank you.
Great. And thank you, Erica, and welcome to everyone, and thank you for joining us today for part 3 of the webinar series on growing the cooperative economy. There we go. Slide issues. If you haven't had a chance to join us for the first 2 webinars, they are available and recorded on our firm website, bernsteinshur.com. And I hope you're able to take a look at those as well. Very informative with a great group of panelists. Today, for the 3rd webinar in the series, we're going to be discussing strategies for planning and financing cooperative expansions. My name is Adam Prescott. I'm an attorney at Bernstein Shur in Portland, Maine. And joining us today as my co-panelists, we have Chris Linder, the Loan and Outreach Officer from Cooperative Fund of the Northeast. And then we're happy to have 2 general managers that actually work in co-ops and have experience with these issues. Doug Johnson, General Manager of the Belfast Community Cooperative, and Kevin Gadsby, the General Manager of Blue Hill Co-op, who have personally gone through and led some of the expansion efforts that we're going to discuss in more detail today. Just a brief agenda before we turn over to the discussion. We're going to start with just a quick introduction into financing and different types of expansion, just to lay sort of the framework of what we're talking about today and some of the different options. And then we're going to spend a bulk of today really doing a deeper dive with the Blue Hill and Belfast co-ops and discussing their experience and issues they ran into and strategy for their expansion projects. Then we're going to turn it back to some more details on financing sources, and Chris is going to talk a little bit about his perspective from the lender side as a loan officer. And then we are going to and commit to leaving a little more time for question and answers. We've been running a little long on the first two, and today we're going to do our best to leave questions. So don't hesitate to drop messages into the Q&A chat, and we will address them as we go or at the end with some time. So with that, why don't I turn it over to you, Chris?
Great, thanks, Adam. And hello, everybody. Yeah, I'm Chris Linder with the Cooperative Fund in the Northeast. I'm based just outside of Bangor. So what are we talking about here? And we're talking about expansion. Essentially, even though cooperatives are a different animal in terms of how it's governed and owned, we're all still business entities, and we're engaged in commerce, and we need capital, whether it's for our day-to-day needs or long-term needs, which we're talking about today more, is expansion and that type of capital. So although it is meant to benefit our member owners, we still do it through commercial transactions. Financial management, just like with any business, whether nonprofit or for-profit, is key, both before we decide on taking on a new project, but also we try to project. And we may be running out of space. We may not have the right kinds of products on the shelves. We can't provide them. So we need to project a bit out, both looking at our financial capacity today, but also with additional sales or additional members joining us, could we see a different change in the financial situation? So it's both looking at our situation today and then also looking at how we might look with a new building or new equipment or new products. Go to the next slide.
Yeah, thanks for that. I think it's back to me. So, we're gonna hear from two co-ops that did, I think literal physical space expansions in terms of new facilities. But obviously expansion can have a lot of different meanings depending on the business you're in and the needs of the business, right? And so, we're not going to talk in too much detail all of these, but I think as people sort of listen and think about the financing strategies and the planning process, I think it can apply to a lot of different things depending on the nature of the business, right? So one is certainly, expanding or improving or renovating your physical space, right? If you're a grocery store, adding shelf space, adding square footage, right, is sort of a simple example of expansion. If you're on the producer side, right, it could be expanding your production capacity or the ability to produce new products, right? That can also require new facilities, new equipment, more employees and other resources, right, to accomplish that, right? So a different form of it. Licensing and franchising are certainly different types of expansion than physical space, but there are ways to grow the footprint and the scale of the business, right? And licensing in particular, if you have some type of proprietary manufacturing product or other sort of things you want to license out to other businesses to use that and generate revenue. And then I think people are familiar with franchising, whether it's fast food or other businesses, right? And there's some very specific legal requirements and contractual parts to the licensing and franchising expansion that I think would be basically another hour plus presentation by itself, but they are options to consider. And I know if people are interested in seeing more, the Cooperative Professionals Guild and some of its members are putting together materials on licensing and franchising strategies for cooperatives. So feel free to reach out, and happy to provide those as well. And then there's also ways through transactions for the business to expand, right? You may acquire another business, right? You can sort of integrate another business. You may acquire more physical space, or find strategic partners in a joint venture, right, to expand the business that way. So this is just an example of some of the different options. But I think when we turn it to Kevin and Doug, the strategies and how they dealt with the member communication and the role of members, I think it's going to apply to almost all of these different forms. So hopefully it's useful no matter what type of expansion you have in mind. With that sort of introduction, I want to save the bulk of the time to talk to our actual co-op employees here today. So why don't I turn it over first to Kevin and then to Doug to just explain a little more about each of their co-ops and their expansion project, and then we'll do a deeper dive with each of them on some follow-up questions.
Sure. Thank you for inviting me to participate in this webinar. As you can see in the slide there, that's our new co-op building that we built in 2019. We broke ground in September of 2018. I joined the Blue Hill Co-op in October of 2016, and when I came on board, much of the preliminary work towards the expansion had already taken place, and I will say that the board at that time had been working on an expansion planning process for, I want to say, 15 years or so. They went through extensive feasibility and market study analysis. And just to give you a little background for those of you who are not familiar with the Blue Hill Co-op, both our current location and the old location. The old location was a rented space in Blue Hill, and total building square footage was about 2,200 square feet with 1,850 retail space. Our sales were fairly stagnant for a few years. We had roughly 1,800, 1,850 co-op owners at that time. And so in any case, when I got there in October of 2016, the fundraising campaign had already launched, and Blue Hill Co-op had decided to go with a crowdfunding platform actually called Fund Maine. We were the first ones to use that crowdfunding platform at the time. And essentially we sold what's called preferred shares, as you can see in the slide. Preferred shares were $100 for one share. And our crowdfunding was split up into 3 phases. Oh, I should back up real quick and just say that when I had arrived in October, prior to me joining Blue Hill Co-op, back in August is when they launched the actual campaign to fundraise. And they were super excited. A letter went out to the co-op owners in August, and the letter essentially said, "We're building our new co-op. We need to raise $1 million in 1 month." And they were full of excitement and optimism, but I think that message was a little difficult for several co-op owners to swallow at the time. So in any case, in October, I worked very hard with the board of directors. We worked with numerous co-op consultants through the financial planning process and revisiting the feasibility and the market study. In any case, we decided, so $1 million in a month did not happen. And by December, we were at $165,000 in preferred share investments. So in working with the board, we decided at the time to push pause on the fundraising campaign at that point. And essentially what we did was we rewrote the fundraising campaign. We remessaged, we realigned, and I felt it was very, very important to take a step back and to really make sure that we were telling the story of the co-op, and to engage the member owners. And we did through a series of events and so forth. And we were providing weekly updates. And I'll tell you that once we really got into telling the story of the co-op, why we needed to expand, we were in a rented space in a very worn out old building. And I began meeting with co-op owners who were interested in investing. And I want to say I met personally with most of our co-op members that did invest. And that went a long way to be able to meet with people, talk with people, and inspire them about what expansion could mean for us as a community, and our local foods economy here in Blue Hill and throughout the peninsula. So our fundraising campaign was split up into 3 phases. The first phase was a public offering through the Fund Maine platform. We had investments from 1 share at $100 up to 1,000 shares, up to $100,000. And by August of 2017, we had 1 year to raise. Our target at that time was $1 million, but we came in at $704,100. And we felt like that was a great beginning to our fundraising campaign. The next phase, we called it phase 2. And this phase was because we had several co-op owners who were seasonal residents out of state and so forth. So we were able to launch a second fundraising campaign for our out-of-state residents who were also co-op owners. And this went out to accredited co-op members. And we raised an additional, through phase 2, $654,000. And then finally, phase 3, we raised an additional, we went back to the Fund Maine campaign. We raised an additional $141,000. And we actually were fortunate enough to end phase 3 much sooner than we had anticipated, because we raised $678,000, in excess of $678,000 in donations from co-op owners. And those donations ranged from $25 to $580,000. And our original donation goal was $75,000. So we surpassed our goal there. That being said, we needed to secure this member owner investment in order to then secure a commercial real estate loan, which we obtained through Coastal Enterprises, the Cooperative Fund of the Northeast, and another organization called Local Initiative Support Corp out of New York City. And we took on a commercial real estate loan for $3,965,000, which we were very fortunate to refinance in 2022. In any case, as you can see in that slide, that our property here is about 5 acres, and a co-op owner had purchased the land, which was covered with trees. And his intent was that the co-op would eventually buy that property from him to build the new co-op. So the board, prior to my joining Blue Hill Co-op, bought the property in 2014. And again, we started our campaign in 2016, broke ground in September 2018, and our soft opening was July of 2019. And 7 months later, COVID hit, and that's another story altogether. But we're incredibly grateful for this community and the response that we had from our co-op owners. Since we've opened the doors, we've gained an additional, it's at least 850 or so new co-op owners. So we started with about 1,800, 1,850. We're over 2,700 co-op owners, and we continue to grow year after year. And we're very grateful for that, and the support we've received from this community has been, it's been amazing. That's all I can say about that.
Great, thanks. Thanks, Kevin. Yeah, Doug.
Sure. All right. My name is Doug Johnson. I'm the general manager at the Belfast Community Co-op. I have been with the co-op since 2011. Our co-op, the building that our co-op is housed in, was built in 1963 as an A&P store. We moved into that space in 1993. This past year, we just finished up our fiscal year. This past year, we were just shy of $12 million in sales. We have 82 workers on staff. We have just over 5,000 equity holding owners, current equity holding owners. I don't. So the project that we are in the midst of a project right now. We are 23, 24 weeks into a 52-week project. I don't know if Chris and Adam are going to get into some of the questions about the details of the project, but sort of a different story than Kevin's. Whereas Blue Hill was building an entirely new building through our process and working through our feasibility and working through, sort of feedback from owners and feedback from our partners on the project. We are renovating our space rather than building new. So, yeah, Chris, I don't know if you want to ask a follow-up question about that, but that's sort of the background of our store.
Yeah, and why don't we talk about Kevin? You came in sort of the process had kind of already kicked off to an extent. Why don't we talk about that a little bit of it, and maybe just from hearing from folks, Kevin, for your part, and Doug, for you as well. I think some of the planning and discussions even happened before you joined Belfast. But one question that folks might be asking is, why did it take so long? Kevin, you mentioned 15 years. What was the process to get to the point of everybody, not everybody, but the majority of folks deciding, okay, that we need to move. What was the impetus? Like what finally drove people to say, yeah, we really need to move and do something? Then my second part question is, I think both of you all explored renovating or new. How did you land? So Kevin, you all landed to new. I'm guessing the old building just wasn't going to work no matter what you could do with it. But in Doug, I know you all explored new sites. So kind of how did you land there? Yeah. So what was the big, how did you get to the final, let's do it, and why? And then what was the reasoning behind new versus just renovating and adding?
Sure.
Yeah, Kevin.
Well, so like you said, our former space, there was no more renovating happening there. It was a rented space, and we had already taken over the entire first floor and actually offices below, and so that wasn't even an option for us. And I think part of the reason why it may have taken so long is that where to build was the question in Blue Hill. There wasn't a whole lot of property available, and so again, fortunately, we had a co-op owner who had a forward vision that the co-op would purchase land that he acquired, and that's exactly what happened. And so, but to give you a little idea, the old location, we had 13 parking spaces, again, 1,800 square feet of retail space, including a cafe and cafe seating area. Our retail sales per square footage were upwards of $1,600 a square foot, which is kind of off the charts. And we had at that time maybe 30 employees max at the old location. The last complete year in that store, we just hit just over $3 million in sales. So I think that the gist of it was, if we really want to make an impact on, and I should say, before I even say that, that space, that old location was cherished by many. I mean, for generations in this community, people loved it. It was just your old worn out market. But it was a gathering place. And I think that part of it was a little difficult for many co-op owners to separate from that particular space, because it was part of the community. It was a part of the fabric of the Blue Hill Peninsula, the old location. So it took a lot of meetings to inspire people and give people vision about what the results of expansion could mean for this community. And what it meant was, not just increased sales, although, so we went from $3 million in sales in the old location. This year, we're going to wrap up at around $8.5 million in sales. We went from 30 employees at the old location. We now have 75 employees here. Wages have increased. The impact of purchasing from our local food producers and farmers has just catapulted business for many of our producers in ways that we were not able to do in the old location. It just would have been impossible. Furthermore, I mean, the timing really for us, I mean, there's no possible way we could have planned it better that we were to open this store, this brand new, beautiful building, by the support of this community, with COVID happening 7 months later. Many of us have said repeatedly that if we had been in the old location and COVID hit us there, we don't know if we would have survived the way we were able to hang on in this new building. The energy efficiency of this building is also remarkable, what we were able to accomplish here. Utilizing waste heat from our refrigeration to the amazing solar array that we have on top of the building. Underneath that parking lot that you see in the slide is an underground erosion mitigation system where all the rainwater that comes down on that parking lot goes through these enormous concrete chambers. And you can't really see it in the slide, but right on the edge of that back of that parking lot is a slope that drops way down. So the system that's underground, by the time the water goes through this erosion mitigation system, it's like a little trickle out the backside of the property there. So yeah, we're very fortunate to be in this space, and it's pretty obvious why we needed to move from the old location to the new. And I will say too, we had several people, it was so hard. I love the old store. This is different. I don't like it. Now they shop here every day, and many of them multiple times in the same day. So, yeah.
That's
Did I
awesome.
answer all the questions?
Yeah, no, that was perfect, Evan. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, Doug.
Sure. All right. So, like I said, I came to the co-op in 2011, and when I showed up, it was very evident that this, I came from a co-op in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and when I showed up here, I could tell that the infrastructure and the building had been neglected to some degree. I could tell that as a worker, it was very evident from the worker experience. I joined the board of the co-op while I was a worker when our previous management team ordered the first market study. When the co-op had been talking at the board level and at the operations level for, again, probably similar to Kevin, probably 10 years at least, about expanding. So I think everyone was very aware of the limitations of the space, very aware of the limitations of what we were able to do in our current co-op. So our market study was done in 2014. I stepped down from the board in order to go out for the general management position and got hired in late 2015. And as soon as I got my feet on the ground, we started in earnest working towards an expansion project. So our first step was bringing in Bill Gessner, who is a nationally known expert on co-op expansion projects. So I invited Bill to come up and meet with me and the board and walk through what are the steps for an expansion project, what are the things that a co-op needs to do in order to prepare itself internally and externally for an expansion project. So that was in 2016. And out of that, we came up with a bunch of options of, if we were going to take this co-op forward, what are our options? So, it ranged from doing absolutely nothing and letting things crumble around us to, moving the location of the co-op somewhere else in town. So, we came up with these 6 options. We whittled them down eventually over the years through feasibility work with our partners, with our architecture and our general contractors. And eventually we came to the conclusion that, for us and in order to best serve our community and, provide the goods and services that our community is asking for, the best use of our resources would be to reinvest in our current building. So, yeah, how did we get to that? I think that's sort of the arc of how we got to that conclusion. that said, throughout the process, we were holding, quarterly owner forums where we were talking about expansion and talking about these options. And we did owner surveys about, about expansion and trying to gauge where people's, where people believed was best for us to move. So yeah, a long process. And I think that the bottom line was that because of neglect, which I understand, I think that, when times are tight and, your options are, do we just keep going with what we have or do we reinvest? Sometimes it's hard to take that leap and, know that reinvestment is going to pay off in the long run. And I think that, without having clear vision and clear direction from the board or from management at the time, I think that we just kept putting band-aids on top of problems for a really long time. So it was a big leap of faith, I think, for the board and for the community to fully get behind this project and know that, the future that we're working towards with this project is going to be is going to benefit everybody.
Great, thanks. Yeah, and both of you touched on it a little bit. I was wondering if you could talk about the role of the board and how they both helped you get to the decision, but also supported you throughout the process. And I'm guessing, uh, not everybody was happy. Kevin, you mentioned some of the folks just not even being excited about moving from one spot to another. But it's a combo question of how did the board sort of help you and support you throughout that process? And then also, I think that's directly tied to them also being member owners and communicating with the wider membership, and maybe tie in the communication piece and how important that is.
Yeah, our board, especially initially, and again, prior to my joining Blue Hill Co-op, they were very hands-on in the planning process towards expansion and the new location and reaching out to co-op owners. Many board members hosted events either at their own homes or we rented out facilities to host events for member engagement, to give presentations on the new project, and the board was very involved. When I came on as general manager, I also assumed the role of project manager, and I just jumped right in and took over the fundraising campaign, as well as working directly with the cooperative consultants like Doug mentioned, Bill Gessner. He and I worked very much on the pro forma business projections, and I worked with the architect and the contractor. But the board was incredibly supportive throughout the process, and their role primarily was with member engagement, along with me, again, meeting with as many co-op member owner investors as I could personally. It went a long way. And I would say because our board was so impassioned and engaged about the process, people rallied behind, and the community really did rally behind this project through and through.
Great. Yeah, Doug.
Yeah, our story is not quite as sunny as that. I think that this project and the process that we've gone through to get to where we are now, I think it really tested our governance. It tested the relationship between governance, between the board and management, and sort of caused us to take a deeper look at our co-op and what it actually, what our structure is and how we operate and what are our policies and how do we show up and adhere to those. Because yeah, it was a struggle. I think that this, and throw in COVID and that that caused all sorts of other disruptions. But I would say once we had alignment, it probably took 2 years worth of conversation to get alignment around a project, and then once we had alignment and once the board was behind the project, they have been phenomenally supportive throughout it. The owner engagement piece has been huge. Like the capital campaign that we raised $1.5 million in member loans through our capital campaign, and that was led primarily by our board secretary. She did an amazing job in working with outside consultants and our phenomenal outreach and membership folks here on the operational side. But yeah, I think that like the takeaway that I had throughout this whole thing, whether you're in operations, whether you are a director and you're going to take on these projects, I think really taking a deep dive, making sure that everybody understands their role in an expansion project. So making sure that everybody is clear about what everybody else's role is, because I think that those gray areas, those areas where it feels like there's some confusion about who gets to decide and who gets to decide what. Those are the things that A, slow a project down, B, can really sort of test the relationship, can test that management board relationship. And ultimately, it's the thing that, my biggest fear throughout was that if we can't all get aligned behind something, if we all can't get a shared vision and move forward, like we're going to lose momentum on the design side. We're going to lose momentum on the owner support side. We're going to lose momentum on the sales side, right? Like we need to continue to grow sales in order to pay for this project. And like the longer this drags on, and the longer where we're not able to go out and tell the story of this project, the harder it is going to be to recoup those sales that we need in order to pay for it. So finding alignment, that's my big takeaway.
That's great. Plus construction costs going up every day.
If I could just
Absolutely.
add one thing to what Doug said, just in total agreement. And I should say too that perhaps one of the reasons why it took 15 years for this community to rally behind this was that very thing, alignment. And much of that work had taken place before I got here. So it might not have been all sunshine and roses during that process. But I was fortunate to come in at a time where our board of directors, they were the relocation committee prior to me joining the co-op and assuming the role of project manager, and having that foundation, it just catapulted us into action.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great. We've got some statistics on the slides for both of you all on the financing. I was wondering though, if we could dive a little bit more into the numbers. One thing that we discussed when we met to plan for this was around for the member campaign, for example, Kevin, Blue Hill went with preferred shares and some donations. Belfast went with member loans and I think donations as well if you wanted to. I was wondering if you could talk about that. I think there's some mixed feelings about some of those choices too. So maybe even giving folks some advice of, I think those are the three main choices that you have raising, equity or equity for projects like that is preferred shares, member loans, or donations. Yeah. But also maybe talk about the dynamic with the other piece, which is the debt that you were able to raise, and I think to some extent probably some of your operating cash or reserves. Yeah.
So for us, again, many of these decisions were made prior to my arrival as GM, but the board had decided to go with, and I should say after much consultation with their legal counsel and so forth and other co-op professionals, they decided to go with a preferred share fundraising platform. For us, it was very successful. Again, we had preferred share investment from one share at $100 all the way up to multiple investments at the $100,000 level or $50,000 level from co-op owners. And I suppose the one thing, you know, and Adam, you might be able to speak to some of this as well, but specific to the cooperative sector, we learned during the process of fundraising, working with our legal counsel, that there are certain protections for co-ops as far as crowdfunding, and that work in the favor of the co-op in certain ways. The one thing I will say about preferred shares, so at least the way that we did it, so we called it A1, A2, A3, and A4. Those were the tiers that you could invest. And A1 was a 3-year term at 0% dividend. A2, 5 years, 2.5%. A3, 7 years, 3.5%. And A4, a 10-year term at 4.5%. So, and all this was spelled out in the investment materials that co-op owners received, pages and pages. And so if you're not averse, or not, I didn't mean to say averse, if you're not versed on crowdfunding investment and specific to co-ops, you might not understand all of the ins and outs. It's kind of nuanced for co-ops. So the reason I'm saying this is because, you know, at face value, you might assume that, oh, I invested $50,000, 3-year term, no, excuse me, a 7-year term, let's say, at 3.5% interest, annual dividends payable to me. Well, the fine print says that dividends are payable, but those dividends can only be payable based on many variables, such as net savings, profitability, cash flow projections, and so forth. So the reason I'm saying all this is because if you were a co-op who were going to decide to go with a preferred share fundraising platform, the real emphasis has to be on making sure that your co-op owners understand what this is. It's not a CD. It's not dividends aren't going to come to you every single year, apart from those other variables of the operations of the co-op. And so, you know, out of our 259 co-op member owners who invested, we've had a small handful of people that maybe didn't quite understand that and assumed that dividends would just be an annual, you know, payment to them each year. Back to our pro forma projected that once we got into the new space with the debt burden that we would carry, we would run a net loss for the first 4 years of operations. And we actually just completed year 4 from opening, and all signals are pointing towards this being our actual first year of profitability if we can hang on for the next 2 months. So things are looking good. But out of that 4-year period, we've actually only been able to pay a dividend based on those investments one of those years. And in the other years, we were not able to do so. So in some ways, some of those co-op owners didn't quite understand that. So if I could emphasize one thing, if you go with preferred shares, make sure that your co-op ownership really understands all that is behind that investment. And again, I should say too, communication goes a long way with co-op owners. I've met with so many, even after they've invested over the last few years, and being able to meet with them and explaining to them the ins and outs of their own investment has helped tremendously.
Yeah, and the advantage to preferred shares or member loans is that financing is generally more flexible and, you know, not as restrictive as, you know, borrowing from us, where you have to pay us no matter how well the co-op is doing. And I think the important thing, I think everybody probably knows it, but the important thing about preferred shares and member loans too is it doesn't give you more of a voice. So everybody still has 1 share, 1 vote. The primary shares, having a preferred share or a Class B share doesn't give you any more of a voice to tell Kevin how to do his job or to have more votes or anything like that. So you still keep to the cooperative principles, even though you are raising equity in a way. Yeah, Doug.
Yeah, I mean, I think that our co-op went with three forms of financing. So with cash reserves, a standard loan through Cooperative Fund of Northeast Local Enterprises Assistance Fund and Coastal Enterprises, a combination of those three institutions, and then owner loans. And why did we go with owner loans? We went it's easy, right? So I think that it is an easier sell than preferred shares would have been. B, we were not in a position where like we needed like we were not our debt to income was really good, and like we could handle when we did our pro forma projections, like we could handle taking on both the debt from owner loans and the debt from the bank loan. Our co-op had done member loan campaigns in the past, right? So our community was comfortable with it, and like for the most, I mean, everybody needs a refresher on what that actually means. But from operationally, we knew how to track things, we knew how to account for it. So yeah, for us, not that it was an easy option, but it was definitely the easier option than trying to um, get people versed on preferred shares.
Yeah, maybe I'll jump in quickly. We have a question, and maybe this is for you, Doug, on the logistics of how the member loans are handled and were
Yeah.
handled. And I know we can talk about some of the sort of the legal implications of the different processes in a minute. But just in terms of actually logistically managing the process internally, right? Tracking the loans, tracking the interest. Can you talk a little about that process and how Belfast handled it?
Yeah, so we had three different terms. Like people could choose an 8, a 10, or a 12-year term. They had three different options for interest rates, so they could do 3, 3.5, or 4%. So we kind of let people mix and match what they wanted to do. I think the majority of folks fell into that 10-year term at 3%. Yeah, so we let, for the most part, like we definitely directed people towards things when it turned out that bucket was filling up. But we are paying out, like right now, like we chose to pay out interest quarterly. So every 3 months, people are getting a check for 3% on their loan. Yeah, logistically, we're just tracking it internally. Again, like our accounting staff who have been here, who were actually workers when the last owner loan campaign went through, so they know how to do this. Yeah, logistically, it's not super complicated on our end to track and pay out those interest payments.
Great, thanks. I'd like to ask you both one last question, and that's just, what are one or two pieces of advice that you would give to a GM or a board member about, what to do or what not to do that you all have learned throughout both of your processes?
I think for me, the emphasis would be on communication. You cannot over communicate, especially when you're asking of your co-op community to make a substantial investment in your endeavors. Communication is key. Telling the story of the co-op is key. And the other thing I would say is, because I've been in other co-ops, actually I served in the same capacity, where there was a lot of resistance toward growth or expansion possibilities. And I think I would say to aspiring co-ops who wish to expand or renovate or whatever, do not underestimate your potential for growth. And yeah, for your communities. There's tremendous opportunities for the cooperative sector to continue to grow, and especially in Maine and with our Maine food economy and our local food communities, it's really been remarkable. I've been fortunate to be a part of the Maine food community for, gosh, I don't know, I think I'm going on 13 years now. But how it's grown during this time period has been amazing to watch. I'm glad to be a part of it.
Awesome. Thanks, Kevin. Doug?
I think that the biggest takeaway, the biggest lesson that I would so strategic visioning, right? Like the idea that co-op leadership, whether it's board management, hopefully board and management together, like the idea that there is someone in your organization, maybe it's you, maybe it's someone else, but that someone in that organization is pushing the envelope of what the co-op can be, what the co-op can achieve, what they're, 10 years down the road, 15 years down the road, 20 years down the road, and then finding alignment around those things. So it's not always easy work, right? If you are that person, if you are that person that is pushing the co-op to be more, but like when like that first one of the first slides that Chris was showing, where we were talking about like expansion opportunities, right? And the idea that or that Adam was showing, where there's so many things that a co-op can be, right? Like, and I think that whether it's operationally or at the board level, yeah, that one. Sometimes it is really easy to get caught up in the minutia of, we run a grocery store, this is what we do, and someone in your organization needs to be pushing the idea that we're a cooperative. It's an economic business model. It is not necessarily just a grocery store. It is not just a coffee shop. It can be so many other things, and it is so many other things. And like, to me, like that's the growth strategy. That is the visioning that hopefully everybody in the organization is holding on to. But someone has to be that leader and has to be pushing that and trying to gather people and bring them along in that process. So alignment and strategic visioning, those would be the two things that I think, if you're going to take this on, you got to figure out why you're doing it. You can figure out how to get there, right? Like, there are so many people who are willing to help you get there, but you got to figure out where you're going and make sure that everybody is behind you when you start moving down that road.
Great. Yeah, I love that point. We're not just selling more groceries. Yeah, a lot more to it. Yeah, Adam, thanks.
Yeah, and thanks, Doug and Kevin. So we only have a few more minutes, and if anyone has questions, please submit them now, and we can try and get to them before lunchtime. So a couple sort of final points and information. On this slide, we've just listed some of the different type of funding options that are available, and I know we've heard a little bit about some of these, and CF&E and CEI, and there's other cooperative lenders. There's government programs. Particularly, there were a lot of new programs through COVID for various funding, and there's existing programs through USDA, the Small Business Administration, and others. There's also private investors, right, including in Maine, including particularly impact investors. If you have environmentally sustainable type of business, it may attract certain types of investors for that, or investors interested in investing in co-op businesses. And then you have additional sort of crowdsource sources. So a lot of different options, and that I think kind of ties into the second slide. And I think Kevin, you mentioned some of this, and Doug as well. I'll say it all with the caveat that I'm not a securities law lawyer, and none of this is legal advice, but these are complicated legal issues, right? When, in the sense of, you're going out to members or even potentially non-members in trying to raise money, whether it's through the loans like Belfast or through preferred shares like Blue Hill did, right? You're going out, those are securities that you're offering. And so, as Kevin mentioned, there certainly are special exemptions available for cooperatives, and when you're raising money from existing members of the cooperative, right? And so you have the benefit of this built-in base of potential investors, right? That it's a single member LLC. You don't have 1,000 or 2,000 existing members who may be interested in supporting the business, right? But just because it's a cooperative and just because you're doing that doesn't mean you don't have to comply with the legal framework as well. And depending on what type of offering you're doing, whether you're going out to accredited or unaccredited investors. Are you only talking to members in Maine, or are you going nationwide, right? There's a lot of different sort of pivots on how that goes and what the federal securities laws may apply, and then the state by state security laws, right? So if you're going to go sell into a state, you need to make sure you're complying with that state's exemptions, right? And maybe it doesn't have the same exemption for co-ops that Maine has. And so these things can quickly become complicated and certainly all answerable questions and things that obviously these two co-ops have worked through. But I just want sort of anyone listening and thinking about, we're going to start this campaign and go reach out to co-op members. You want to be careful and deliberate, not only from the operational side and the pro formas and working with, Chris and your other lenders, but also in terms of, that outreach and how you're doing that and making sure you're complying with the legal piece. And I think, there's obviously significant disclosures that go with part of that, right? And I think this ties in as well to the communication piece, right? There may be sort of minimum disclosures that you may want to send to ordinary investors, but there may be, additional disclosures and communications when you're dealing with co-op members, right? Because it's a different type of investment and investor you're dealing with. And so a lot of nuance and kind of creativity and room for that, but also you just want to make sure you're being careful and getting the right counsel and taking that that step by step. So we've just highlighted here a couple different sorts. I think Kevin, you had talked about the fund Maine, which certainly provides one option. I think there's also limitations depending on how much money you're trying to raise and who you're trying to raise it from, whether that's going to be the right fit. And I don't know, we got a couple minutes left. I don't know, Doug, if maybe you want to weigh in on some of the considerations and at least sort of the process internally of trying to figure out, were you going to go through like a crowdfunding fund Maine? Were you going to do nationwide versus local, and how that process worked out?
I mean, I think, for the process that we went through, Adam, I mean, I think the legal counsel was very important to us in making sure that what we were trying to achieve and everything was on the up and up, and again was as clear and concise as it could be. And then we worked through, with our legal counsel, we worked through a number of different scenarios and trying to figure out how to apply those securities laws or make sure that we were complying with those securities laws. So yeah, again, when you don't know how to do this, because I think for many of the general managers and the boards that take on expansion projects, like it's probably going to be your first time, because I don't know if you would do this again if you were asked to. But there are so many people out there that are willing to help, and there's so much support and so much good counsel. So I would seek that out, and I would certainly say, in our case, having really good legal counsel led us in the right direction.
Yeah, and I think we have we have about 2 minutes left. We did okay on timing today. So I don't know, Chris, in the final minute or so, if you had any thoughts just on your perspective from the loan officer side, and then we can wrap up at noon.
Yeah, and I wanted to hone in particular on something, Kevin, that you mentioned earlier. So in Blue Hill's projections and many co-ops who are expanding into buildings and new equipment, when you buy an asset like that, you often have an expense that's not cash out called depreciation. And so often in your first couple of years with the new building or equipment, you show an accounting loss. But really what's important to us as lenders is your cash flow. So actually we don't ignore depreciation completely, because you always need to replace things, but we take it out of the calculation and really look at, can you afford the debt? And that's the most important thing that we're looking for. And the two other things that were covered that by Kevin and Doug that really get us comfortable are the team that's together, the staff, the board, and the experts. And then what are you raising for equity? So if you came to us and said, hey, we have a $6 million project, we need $6 million, we're probably going to raise our eyebrows and say, okay, what are you putting into the game? And, you know, skin in the game kind of a concept. So it's what are we going to raise ourselves? And then the debt should be the gap filler and not the primary source. And so I think I'll stop there, Adam. Kind of those are really the three key things that we're looking for making an assessment of, can this co-op pull off this project and generate the cash flow and pay us back. I mean, we're a nonprofit, but you know, we need to recirculate those funds to other co-ops and have to be paid back. Yeah, and I'll stop there.
Great. Thank you, Chris. I think we're right at noon, so why don't we let everyone get to lunch on time. And Kevin, Doug, and Chris, thank you for participating today. I do want to thank just quickly our sponsors, including all the great work from my team here at Bernstein Shur behind the scenes to handle the marketing and the IT aspects. It's not easy to pull these things together as seamlessly as they do. So thank you. And then thank you as well to Cooperative Maine Business Alliance, Cooperative Development Institute, and CF&E for your support. So the slides will be available on our firm website, as well as a recording of the presentation and the prior presentation. So again, thank you everyone for joining us.
Thank you. Happy Co-op Month.